The beginning of Facebook. We finally arrived at the social media section of the 90-day business sprint. I am so excited to get started talking to you about Facebook because, as we all know, Facebook is the biggest beast of them all. You have to imagine your business being in a shopping center. If you set up your business in a shopping center where there's hardly any traffic and nobody's walking past and, it's just like tumbleweed in that shopping center, that's kind of like what happens when you set up online and you set up your website and then you go, why is nobody coming to my website? So the answer is because you haven't set up in all the different social media platforms to drive people from those social media platforms onto your website. So Facebook being the biggest, it's got 3.37 billion people who've signed up for it, but at the moment it's 2.7 billion active monthly users on a regular basis. So let me give you some great little stats before we get cracking and getting tore into the details. Facebook demographics, the highest growing users, and this has been the case for a couple of years now, is the over 65-year-old group. So everybody's desperate to get the over 65s using Facebook so they can communicate and update and check out how everybody else in the family is going. Also, fewer teens are using Facebook now than in previous years. Most self-respecting teenagers, as soon as they realized that they're not only their uncles and aunties and mums and dads and grannies and granddads are all on Facebook, they're like, no, it's not cool enough for me. We're off to have our own place where we can say and do all our inappropriate teenage young person stuff. And that generally tends to happen over on YouTube, Instagram, and Snapchat as well. TikTok, of course, too. And then another great stat is only 10% of Facebook users live in the US or Canada, obviously. And 74% of high income earners are Facebook users. So a lot of my law clients, for example, will say, oh no, none of my clients are on Facebook. But the reality is everybody who's anybody is on Facebook. And so if all you're doing is just checking in on your Facebook feed, finding out what your rallies are doing or what's happening at the local chess club or looking at the schedule for the football or something, well, chances are you're always going to be served up with some kind of ad because that is the business model. It's the same as a newspaper. If you want to have one of those free newspapers, it means that you don't actually pay to use it, but you are part of the product in the sense that if you look at the Metro newspaper, you don't have to pay for it, but you are being shown ads. And therefore, the newspaper is able to show you all that great content based on the fact that they can get paid for showing you ads as well. So you are part of the product. Same as Facebook. Facebook doesn't charge you to use it, but you can only use it on the condition as you see the ads. So it's pretty much like any other kind of freemium business model, as they call it. If, on the other hand, they decide that they're going to charge, much like the traditional newspapers that charge a cover price, then it still means that 80% of the revenue comes in from the advertisers for that business. So if any of the social media platforms decided to actually charge people to use them, then it would still not deter the advertisers from using it. So there's no way you can escape from the advertising. It's there no matter who you are in any part of the world. 1.62 billion users use Facebook daily. So that's a great piece of statistic and information which LinkedIn still hasn't published. They still haven't published their daily active users or their monthly active users. Instead, people have to guess what those numbers might be. Another great stat is 88% of Facebook users are on the platform to stay in contact with friends and family. Surprise, surprise. And then the highest traffic occurs midday on Wednesdays and Thursdays. So if you're wanting to make sure that your post is seen by the most amount of people on the newsfeed as they're scrolling through, the best time to be posting is anywhere between 11 and 2 o'clock on a Wednesday or a Thursday. Another cracking wee stat is that in 2020, the average daily time on Facebook remained pretty flat, despite the fact that we had massive lockdown and we had a lot of people online. The use of Facebook didn't necessarily go up significantly. Another great stat, number 9, Facebook Stories has 300 million active users daily. So we'll go into the difference between the Facebook newsfeed and the Facebook Stories later on. But suffice to say, it's a kind of different feature within Facebook that you can use as a business. As opposed to Instagram, which also has an Instagram feed and Instagram stories, but their Instagram stories have 500 million active users daily. So you can see the Instagram stories are a lot more popular than the Facebook stories. 53% of adults on Facebook do not understand how their news feed displays posts. All right, so this is a very, very important factor to understand. When Facebook decides what is going to come up in your newsfeed, they have to try and make sure that whatever you see on your newsfeed is going to be the stuff that you're actually going to be most likely to appreciate. So that can only be determined by no, I don't want to have FaceTime. That can only be determined by what kind of posts in the past you've been engaging with. So if Uncle Bobby is always talking about his fishing and you generally tend to ignore it, then you won't be seeing much of Uncle Bobby's fishing posts. But if Auntie Jeannie is always talking about her knitting and you're quite fascinated by that process and you tend to comment and like and maybe share to other people, then that's a clear indication to the algorithms that you value this type of content. So they generally will give you more of Auntie Jeannie's stuff. Similarly, when it comes to the ads or any kind of business posts, they will not come up in the news feed at all unless you have already, through your activities on Facebook or in social media or on the internet, have indicated that you might be interested in this type of thing. So it sounds a bit Big Brother-ish, but basically what happens is there are cookies that follow you everywhere that you go onto internet. So they don't necessarily know that it's you, Alison McLaughlin, who's on Amazon looking at red boots, and then suddenly she's on Facebook and those red boots are popping up in her newsfeed. It's pretty much like that, except they don't necessarily know who you are and they do not have access to your telephone number or your email or anything like that. The only way social media can get access to that is if you hand it over, and at that point then you're much further down the sales funnel with any organization. But up until the point where you hand over your email or any of your contact details, they only know you as a statistic, basically. So if they're trying to target men between the ages of 19 and 24 who like football and who are fans of Celtic, well, guess what? That particular ad will turn up in your news feed, and that's all they'll know about you based on the kind of activities that you've already displayed in the past. So, for example, going back to my lawyers, they will say, oh, well, none of my clients are on Facebook and they're certainly not clicking on any tax accountancy or whatever. But the reality is most people on Facebook will go to websites and to Facebook pages which are related to what they're interested in. So say, for example, this lawyer has decided to go and like the Law Society of Scotland. Well, guess what? We can target that lawyer based on what they're like. So we set up an ad that says, we want to make sure that all the people who are fans of the Law Society of Scotland see this ad. Basic as that. So that's when it comes to the ads. That's where you pay a bit of money to make sure that your content is seen by specific types of people. Whereas when it comes to the normal content, the everyday content, it only goes to be shown get my words out. It's only seen by people who are actually fans of your page. So therefore, if you do not have a strategy to grow the page, then the numbers of people are going to be less and less who actually see that page. Because the reality is, when you're putting up content and hardly anybody is engaging with it, that tells the algorithms that the content is not of value. So therefore, the key criteria for getting anything to function really well on Facebook is engagement. And that applies for Twitter and all the rest of it. Okay, so we'll dive more into that in more detail later on, but that gives you a basic indication of how the algorithms work. Okay, here's another cracking little stat. 94% of Facebook ad revenue is from mobile. So when you're setting up the ads, make sure that you are always targeting mobile to make sure that you get the best returns for your investment. The average price for Facebook ads has been going down. It was always the cheapest and most targeted in the universe, but it's actually been going down, particularly during Corona, because of the fact that so few companies are actually functioning now. So that means the cost per ad and cost per click has gone down. The average cost per click for a Facebook ad is $1.72. And the overall Facebook ad impressions has increased 37% in 2019-2020. Users watch around 85% of Facebook ads, and square Facebook videos get 35% more views than landscape videos. All right, so that's our little kind of whistle-stop tour around some of the kind of basic stats around Facebook. And now we're going to dive into a couple of features of what makes Facebook so ridiculously amazing for businesses. And that's going to be quite surprising for a lot of you, because we're going to debunk a lot of your preconceptions of what Facebook is when it comes to business and marketing.